Welcome to FlightGlobal Focus, your new essential podcast for trusted aviation insight. We publish new episodes twice weekly. Join us on Friday for a concise news briefing and on Monday for in-depth analysis covering airlines, defense, and aerospace. My name is Amber Elias, and joining this News Focus episode is America's aviation reporter, Howard Hardy. Howard, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's take a look at the top aviation stories this week on FlightGlobal. Firstly, it's been a profitable first year for British Airways Euroflyer, their short-haul operation out of Gatwick Airport, with the airline achieving an operating profit of £27.5 million. A real bounce back after short-haul operations were suspended for 2 years at Gatwick during the COVID-19 pandemic. Then we have Norse also turning in its first operating profit for the second quarter, with a figure of $4.4 million, as positive momentum from the beginning of the year continued into the summer for the Norwegian airline. The airline generated an average load factor of 97%, and passenger numbers rose by 36%. The retirement of Spirit Airlines network planner John Kirby comes as the airline's rebuild falters. Spirit's network has undergone significant changes in recent months, as the ultra-low-cost carrier has attempted to right-size itself to match sagging demand for discount airline seats in the USA. Spirit emerged earlier this year from the Chapter 11 bankruptcy process after years of poor financial performances and has continued struggling following financial restructuring. But amongst the highs and lows of airline news this week is the main topic I wanted to chat to you about today, the industrial action at Air Canada. Can you give us a run-through of what happened?
Sure. Air Canada and its regional arm, Air Canada Rouge, have restarted their operations after a strike by flight attendants brought the carrier's network to a standstill for several days. Nearly 10,000 flight attendants walked off the job starting on the 16th of August, forcing the cancellation of more than 3,000 flights and counting. The airline says it has reached a tentative agreement with the Canadian Union of Public Employees, with flight attendants agreeing to immediately return to work, though a ratification vote is still pending, and that vote is due to happen at the end of the month or early in September. Air Canada has said that restoring its full network schedule is a complex process that could take more than a week, as aircraft and crews are scattered out of position. The strike defied both federal arbitration orders and back-to-work directives, marking what the union calls a historic fight for industry-standard compensation. For passengers, disruptions will linger for days. On the business side, the carrier has suspended its full-year financial guidance for 2025.
4 days doesn't seem like a lot, but it caused Air Canada to pull its financial guidance for 2025. Like you said, after operations ceased for nearly a week. How has this shaped the carrier's financial forecast going into Q4 and 2026?
Yeah, you're right. 4 days of no operations maybe doesn't sound like a lot, but the impact will extend for much longer than that 4-day shutdown. Air Canada seems to think the follow-on effects will last for more than a week. So far today, which is August 21st, they've canceled about 30 flights, and that number will probably grow as the full day of operations moves forward. This is really like a 2-week period of significant disruption in which several thousand flights have been canceled so far, and hundreds of thousands of passengers haven't gotten where they're going. It will take Air Canada that long to get up and running again because their aircraft and their flight crews are out of position. So maybe the jet they need to fly a certain route is parked in Ottawa instead of Vancouver, and their pilots and flight attendants are in Montreal or what have you. So it takes some time for everything to get back in place because airline networks are delicate things that can get thrown off balance pretty easily. As far as the long-term impact of this operational shutdown, Air Canada has pulled its previously issued financial guidance for the full year of 2025, as we mentioned. So it's clear that they're expecting this event to hit their bottom line negatively. How big of a hit isn't clear right now, but it seems likely that it will end up costing them probably hundreds of millions of Canadian dollars. This recent stuff, these labor issues, just adds to what has already been a challenging year for Air Canada, as well as its counterparts like WestJet, Porter Airlines, Flair Airlines, and Air Transat. Demand for flights to the USA in particular, that has been in the dumps since the Trump administration started its tariff war earlier this year, and also started using a lot of hostile rhetoric toward Canada in general. It seems that Canadians are still hesitant to spend their money by flying to Las Vegas and Los Angeles and Florida and other popular vacation destinations in the US. That phenomenon has already been eating into Air Canada's revenue. We will see how much this operational disruption adds to that financial difficulty when airline earnings season rolls around again in October, and whether Canadian air travelers really are looking elsewhere for vacations this winter. In the big picture, Air Canada is attempting to become a $30 billion revenue company by 2030 in Canadian currency. I don't think recent events have derailed that goal. They're still in a dominant competitive position as the top dog in a country where it's really difficult to fly profitably. They have lots of new narrow-body and wide-body jets due for delivery over the next several years, and I think they're going to be okay in the long term.
So beyond the financial implications for Air Canada into the future, how do we see these strikes and the new compensation deal affecting the wider industry?
So I'm a reporter for Airline Business as well as FlightGlobal. So at Airline Business, we tend to think of these things in terms of how such a disruption might affect an airline's bottom line or its overall financial health. And similarly, when we talk about how worker groups signing new contracts and getting raises affects the broader industry, I tend to think about how it impacts the ability of airlines to turn profits. And we all know that airlines are low margin businesses. It's notoriously difficult to make money consistently as a passenger carrying airline. And that is especially true in Canada, where the distances are really vast and there are lots of fees associated with landing at their airports. So rising labor costs represent another pressure point, especially for low-cost carriers. Those discount carriers have a model where they don't spend much money on operating their aircraft, so they don't have to charge that much for airfares. They can offer an inexpensive consumer product, basically. And that really only works if their expenses really are lower than those of major airlines. And recently we have seen higher labor costs for pilots and flight attendants and maintenance workers kind of squeeze the margins for low-cost carriers in the US in particular. When we're talking about a beast like Air Canada, it seems like they will be able to absorb higher flight attendant wages just fine. They're the biggest airline in the country. They fly an extensive international network and they generate billions in quarterly revenue. They're not in this position where one line item is going to ruin them. I think they're going to be fine.
So as you say, we really shouldn't be worried about Air Canada's bottom line going forward. They are a vast airline, and although it might seem like this has caused a lot of disruption for them, it's actually caused more disruption for passengers rather than the finances of this company.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't think there's any reason necessarily to be concerned about Air Canada's long-term financial health.
So absolutely. And in Europe this summer, we have seen air traffic controller strikes affecting France, with Ryanair and EasyJet demanding EU action. And Boeing has also grappled with labour issues on both the commercial and defence sides in recent months. Is this unusual to see the aviation industry so strongly affected by union action?
Honestly, it's always something with these airlines. They're always being disrupted by weather events and ATC delays and IT outages and engine problems and striking pilots pretty much all the time. It just never ends. Historically speaking, it's pretty common to see labor issues tripping up airline operations. Even just in Canada, WestJet, Air Transat, and Air Canada have all separately had their issues with pilots and flight attendants and maintenance workers and even dispatchers all in the past 18 months or so. This is not an unusual circumstance that we're seeing here. And if you look around, labor issues have thrown a serious wrench in the plans of lots of aerospace companies lately. Textron Aviation, which produces Cessna and Beechcraft and Pipistrel aircraft, they had a weeks-long machinist strike last summer. And of course, Boeing's commercial program in the Northwest shut down for about 5 weeks in the fall, which was a huge contributor to their rather disastrous year of 2024. So I don't think it's unusual for aerospace companies to be disrupted by labor issues and for that to hurt financially. It's just another day of trying to build complicated machines and run complicated businesses. Stuff happens.
Yeah, no, it does seem that although this has been particularly disruptive for Air Canada and passengers who are booked onto Air Canada or looking to book for the end of summer and booking their winter plans, there are actually other impacts globally that probably even have a bigger impact on airlines and aerospace and the industry rather than 4 days of strikes. Even though it seemed very disruptive, tariffs, other labor disputes within different markets, even things like weather and air traffic controllers that are completely out of the remit of Air Canada itself. It feels like there's more disruptions to be had ongoing for airlines, and we can't predict everything.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always something. And you mentioned the passenger side with Air Canada. I think that will be interesting to see if this rough period of operations causes them to take a hit reputationally, and whether that might cause customers to go elsewhere to fly with WestJet or Porter Airlines. That all remains to be seen.
Yeah, I guess we'll be looking back on that next year at the passenger numbers and with their financial reporting later on in the year. We'll wait and see what they say.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get a much clearer idea of how this has all affected Air Canada in some when they report their third quarter financial results.
Fantastic, Howard. Thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode of FlightGlobal Focus.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
FlightGlobal Focus is a production of FlightGlobal with audio production by Lucy Johnson. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, or for commercial opportunities, please email podcast@flightglobal.com, and more information can be found in the show notes. Listen, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.